Hello, BookTube. It's Tuesday, and that means Tag Tuesday. That's when we all do tags and rummage around in our bookcases to find answers. And today's tag is special. It's epic. It is a foodie tag from Josh at Literary Gladiators. It's number 27. It's the 27th foodie tag. And a new foodie tag is always a special occasion. I felt a little guilty not doing what I believe was the last foodie tag. I think it was the last foodie tag that was all about hamburger. It was all about eating processed meat from meat farming. And I thought about it for a long time, even started to put down answers to it, but I just I just couldn't do it. And there's about 1,000 hours of video footage on YouTube that if you watched, and I strongly advise that you do not, would probably prevent you from doing it too. But fortunately, the next foodie tag, this one, I can easily do, even though it applies to me even less than the last one did. This is the coffee brand book tag. And it's all about humanity's favorite colloidal suspension. It's all about coffee, which I don't drink and never have drank. So, which makes it very different from, for instance, the burger tag, where I have had more than my share of meat in my life. But coffee, never. And even the times when I have been mildly intrigued enough to wonder about it, the descriptions of the coffee drinking experience from coffee's own enthusiasts makes it sound just horrible. It makes it sound just absolutely terrible. There's this cheap, artificial, jangly energy for a couple of hours, and then a horrible coming down period that either drives you out to get more coffee to postpone it, or it puts you through the tortures of hell for what is, it seems to me, a very small boost in attention or productivity. So even if I were so inclined, I don't think I would do it. But that doesn't mean I can't do the tag, especially since the tag's a lot of fun. I just did a tag earlier this week, the BookTube Backstage tag, and I'm going to take the same approach with this one, which is to hope that you all do it. The foodie tags should have universal responses because they are so good. So we're going to go on. I gather from the title of the tag that a lot of these things are types of coffee. I really wouldn't know that, but some of them I've heard of, so I'm gathering that they're all that. And number one is Maxwell House, which I have heard of. A work that was good to the last drop, which actually is tougher than it sounds. As I've mentioned on this channel many times, an endemic flaw of modern fiction. I'm assuming that fiction is meant here. It's BookTube, so I'm assuming that everybody at all times means fiction. But if we confine this to fiction, an endemic problem of fiction is that it doesn't. People who were born after 1980 don't have any idea how to end a fictional project that they start. They're okay with the beginning. They're pretty good with the virtue signaling online. They're pretty good with attacking their benefactors, but they have no idea how to end the story. They don't even know, it seems to me, from having read a million examples of this crap, they don't even know what it is to end a story. They don't even know what it means. No one's ever bothered to teach them. Of course, because if you teach them, that implies they didn't know something before you taught them, and that's grounds for suing. But nevertheless, if you go especially to the genres that literary snobs hate, you will find people who know how to end a story. And the one that I have in mind, the one that came to mind right away, is Procurator by Kirk Mitchell, an old science fiction novel that I don't have anymore. It had, I think, 3 sequels. I don't have any of those anymore. They are terrific, absolutely terrific. They are science fiction reality in which Rome never fell, in which Rome encompassed the technological revolution, the industrial revolution, and conquered the seas, and just stayed an empire. And I forget when this book was written. It was in the early 80s. Presciently, it has Rome fighting the forces of Islam, who have mastered non-technological abilities that may threaten the empire. But the main point is our main hero, who he's a soldier in the ranks. He is a procurator in the ranks of this Roman Empire, but he's not gung ho. He's not jingoistic. He's not all entirely on board with it. And the Procurator itself, the first novel, has a slam bang adventure story as a plot. And I believe that its Procurator, it may be one of the sequels, but I believe that it's Procurator that has a fantastic ending. Just a bravura 3 paragraphs of writing where a character walks away from the Roman Empire. And it's not just a matter of distance. It's that he, after a certain amount of time, he gets to a place where people only think about the empire every day, not every minute. Then he walks further, much further, and gets to a place where people only hear about the empire once a month. Then he walks even farther and to a place where people think of the empire as quasi-mythological, with all sorts of myths that already exist in these places about people that he knows for real, that he knows face to face as living beings. And finally, he gets to a place where no one's ever heard of the empire at all, and then is content. And that, of course, is a direct take on the story of Ulysses, of Odysseus, of the end of Odysseus, that he puts an oar on his shoulder and walks inland so far, his destination being in his mind a place where the inhabitants won't know what an oar is, where he'll be that far from the ocean. There'll be a conceptually different world, not just a geographically different world. But I wanted to take the opportunity anyway to recommend a Procurator. If you ever see it at a used bookstore, you should do 2 things right away. Number 1, read it. And then number 2, send it to me, because I don't at the moment have a copy of Procurator. I've lost count of how many copies of it I've given away. Question number 2 is Folgers. Again, this is a coffee brand that I think I know. A book you were eager to resume reading. This is one of a handful of questions in this tag that just catch me on an odd hop. And I can't off the top of my head think of a book like this because I don't typically stop reading. I typically, over on the couch, I pick up a book, start reading it, start yelling at it, start annotating it, and then finish it. And then get up and walk the dog or make some food or something like that. But I typically don't stop in the middle of a book and think, well, I'll have to get back to this. Sometimes I do, but not. Usually those are rereads, so there's a mitigated amount of eagerness. Prompt number 3 is Chock Full O'Nuts, a work that transports you into a wealthy environment. And you might be thinking along the line, like for instance, of The Great Gatsby, which entered into the public domain on the 1st of January in 2020, and so there are a million new editions of The Great Gatsby out in bookstores, and a million more coming, and a million adaptations and pastiches. They'll be endless, they'll be limitless, because no one has to pay Scribner anymore. So there'll be gay pastiches, there'll be musicals, there'll be anything you name it, and we'll see a Gatsby perturbation. But that isn't the thing that came to mind. The thing that came to mind was something that we don't often associate with a wealthy environment, and that is the Jeeves and Wooster novels of P.G. Wodehouse. I reread a couple of them in 2020, and I loved them. I was pleased all over again. But I also noticed that although Bertie Wooster and his friends are often in financial scrapes, they often need help in one way or another. It's easy to lose track when you're reading the Jeeves and Wooster novels of how often Bertie's friends ask him for money. It happens in almost every book. And if you're familiar with the Jeeves and Wooster novels enough so that you can stop paying attention to the main antics of the plot, then you can start to think about the backgrounds. And one of the things that struck me in those 2 that I reread in 2020 is that Bertie Wooster lives in a world of complete downy pillow wealth. He never wants for anything materially. I think that was a very canny decision on P.G. Wodehouse's part to make Bertie that way. No one else is that way, or a lot of the other young actors in the stories aren't that way. But Bertie is that way so that he doesn't ever have to think about it, and that helps. That actually increases the opportunities for comedy. I kind of like that. You ordinarily wouldn't think of Jeeves and Wooster novels. I don't think you would as elitist, money-oriented books. Of course, they aren't. They're oriented for comedy, but nevertheless, that was an element that struck me enough so that it came to my mind when I read this prompt. Then number 4 is the one prompt that I recognize intuitively on a DNA level, and that is Dunkin, formerly known as Dunkin' Donuts. Those of you who aren't from America, who aren't from the Northeast, who aren't from Boston, Dunkin' Donuts is a chain. In the Northeast, they are popular. In Massachusetts, there is one every 15 feet. No exaggeration. If you're in for instance, Massachusetts, and you are living so far away from the nearest Dunkin' Donuts that you can't physically see it from your front window, then you're in the wilderness and you should move right away. And they're very simple. For the most part, they are very simple. You build a little box. It's very, very basic. There's a bathroom that's the size of a cupboard for the employees. There's a deep fryer and another deep fryer and some shelves. It's very simple. It's a box. There's no seating. There never was any seating, even when the pandemic wasn't raging. And it's basically a place for bad coffee and fried dough. You can get all sorts of other things at Dunkin' Donuts, but it's mainly a place for bad coffee and fried dough. And there is always custom. In Massachusetts, there are always customers all the time. In fact, one of the biggest existential dreads that I had somebody's finally awake. We've been having an ongoing psychological war here because the Frida was on the couch with me. I was reading, and a big block of brilliant, warm, bright sunlight slowly inched its way until it was covering the whole couch. And she threw off the blanket, and she was just baking in the sun, just baking. And it had been a very long time since we went for a little walkie poo, and I was getting a complete refusal to even think about moving while the couch was like that. But somebody is up now, and she's now elaborately stretching, so that's good. Gives us something to do when the tag is over. But as I was saying, one of the existential dreads that I had when the pandemic first started is that Dunkin' Donuts would close. They never did. My Dunkin' Donuts, the one that I can see from my front door, they never did close. Thank God. I don't go there for coffee though. I go there for hash browns and Boston cream pies, but not for their coffee, which smells like petroleum and probably is largely composed of petroleum. But the prompt for Dunkin' is a scene-stealing supporting character. And here I went with one of the marquee scene-stealing supporting characters of all time, and that is Tom Bombadil from The Lord of the Rings. Those of you who are familiar with The Lord of the Rings from the Peter Jackson movies but haven't gotten around to reading the big book won't know about Tom Bombadil because Peter Jackson left him out. And there's a good reason for that. I'm a diehard Tolkien fan, and when I went to see Fellowship of the Ring in the theater, I was kind of sort of wondering. I wasn't hoping. I was kind of sort of wondering. I already knew that Peter Jackson was a pretty good, pretty efficient director. So I had a feeling that there was a 90% chance that he would cut Tom Bombadil from the movie. And he did. He did. And there's a good reason for that. Basically, the story is that young Frodo and 3 other hobbits are fleeing from their home in Hobbiton. And Frodo is in possession of a ring, an unornamented gold ring. That is actually the one ring of power, an immensely powerful artifact created by the Dark Lord Sauron. That, as you will know, even if you just know The Hobbit, turns the wearer invisible. But in Lord of the Rings, the menace of the One Ring is deepened and broadened enormously. It's not just a trinket that will turn you invisible for a children's adventure story. It's much, much more dangerous than that. And at one point in the Hobbit's adventures, before they hook up with Gandalf and Aragorn and start the book, proper, they run into a man-like creature, a man called Tom Bombadil, who's taller than a hobbit, but shorter than a human, and who is very strange, stranger really than any other character in Lord of the Rings. And he's very happy. He sings all the time. He lives with a character named Goldberry, who appears to be a kind of water nymph, and he seems completely content. Nothing seems to bother him. But as Frodo learns in an amazing scene, the One Ring has no ability to affect him at all. No ability whatsoever. It doesn't turn him invisible when he puts it on, and he can turn it invisible. It doesn't. He seems to have complete power over it, or to be something so much older and more powerful than any of the magic that Sauron used that the ring is irrelevant to him. And you might think, okay, well, that makes him important. Why would a director leave him out? But no, he is definitely a supporting character who takes over. He fascinates. If you read The Fellowship of the Ring, you'll be fascinated by Tom Bombadil. But after the hobbits leave him eventually and go on their way, they immediately fall into trouble. They need his help. He saves them, and that's it. He leaves the narrative of Lord of the Rings after that. He doesn't help with the War of the Ring. He doesn't help defeating Sauron. Doesn't do anything like that. He's only mentioned really again in this main source, in the main narrative. He's only mentioned again at the Council of Elrond, where Gandalf dismisses the idea of going to him for help. Dismisses the idea effectively. It's Tolkien dismissing the idea of including him in the narrative, because what can you do with him? So I'm going to say Tom Bombadil for Dunkin' Donuts. Then number 5 is Wawa, a chain I know very well, although I've never set foot in one. A work that makes you think of or have an idea about New Jersey, because, oh my God, Wawa is so New Jersey. And for this, I want to pick Richard Price, specifically the novel Clockers, but really anything else. There's a particular kind of tawdry earnestness that goes hand in hand with New Jersey, especially along the shore. It's a little bit more signature for me nowadays for the last 5 years or so, because I have been following the antics on YouTube of what wags in the industry call the Jersey Juice Boys, a group of young Instagram weightlifters who all know each other, and they're all from the same township in New Jersey, and they were all fairly enthusiastic weightlifters when they were in high school, and then suddenly in about the same 4-month period, they all started lifting 700 pounds in a deadlift. They all started, you're watching them on YouTube videos, and they are breaking world records. These teenagers are breaking world records for their deadlifts and whatnot. And you're thinking, okay, well, shouldn't this be the national news? This is kind of strange. And then, of course, you think, steroids, human growth hormones, SARMs, that sort of thing. That in other words, there's no legitimate way that teenagers from New Jersey could do this, much less that all of them do, and that they all know each other, and that they all go to the same places. So it started to become a rather obvious inference that they were on something, that they were enhancing their own performance, especially since there's no way, if you're going to claim, as some of them still do, if you're going to claim that you didn't enhance your performance, then you have to stop everything and explain an 800-pound deadlift. That's not just, if you're going to say, I'm all natural, I'm natty, dude, I'm natty, bro. If you're going to say that, and then you do a vlog where you go to Wawa and you get some food and you're hanging around your house and you're talking with your friends, and then you go to the gym and you've got copyright-free rap music playing the whole time, and you do a montage, and during the montage you, oh, by the way, deadlift 800 pounds, and then you move on to finish the blog doing other stuff. No. Insert the cartoonish brakes screeching noise. You have to stop and explain why you are suddenly at age 18 stronger than 99.9% of the humans who have ever lived on Earth. And you can't. But anyway, I'm going to suggest Richard Price. I'm also going to take this opportunity to recommend him. I don't know that his fiction will be everybody's cup of tea, but he writes at least memorably, very memorably. I think there's genius there. But let's see here. What is the next one? Number 6, Starbucks. Even I have heard of Starbucks. Before the pandemic, I had a friend who was insistent that you need to try it. A friend kept saying, you need to try it. You need to try this experience that so many people, creatives is the word that he used, the experience that so many of them have is to go to Starbucks and just work there, surrounded by other people who are working on their laptops, doing one thing or another, periodically ordering a little bit of food here and there, or a drink here and there. And he insisted to the point where I was actually intrigued. I actually got a gift card. I think I still have it, and I think it's still good. That has, $20 on it. So that the idea was to get me started going to a cafe. Then the pandemic hit, and of course I'm not going to do that. You couldn't wipe down those surfaces enough in all of creation to get me to do that. But in addition to that, I would have had second thoughts anyway. I'm perfectly comfortable working on my couch with my little schnauzer. So why would I go? Why would I leave her? First of all, I can't bring her with me and go to a cafe like that. But Starbucks was the location of interest there. And the prompt is, a writer you find pretentious but admirable. One came right to mind. I may be the last defender of this writer that I know of. It's Jonathan Safran Foer, who had a breakout debut when he was a very young writer and was enormously pretentious even then, just incredibly pretentious. And he's grown more and more pretentious with time, and his books have grown more and more bloated and self-indulgent and more solipsistic, really, in ways that really can't be excused. And I'm not trying to defend them, especially his latest one, Here I Am, which was autofiction in all but name, except for the trappings of the outside world, which didn't do the book any favors. That didn't help it any. And yet, even in Here I Am, I thought there were long stretches of uncontestable brilliance. So I am. You find pretentious but admirable. I'm not sure that I admire. I don't admire him as a person. I don't admire his behavior. I don't admire his opinion of himself, but I do admire his prose. I wonder. He's an author that I look at and think, what will he do in 10 years? It's obvious that mere reflection will not change his art, but it doesn't have to be mere reflection. Right? It could be life that changes his art. If he loves someone, he could lose that someone. And I don't mean divorce. I mean, he could lose that someone forever. They could die. Or they could undergo a serious hardship. Or he could. I get the impression that he is a genuine writer, so no matter what, he won't stop writing. But that might change his writing. I could easily see that happening. Even though he's very young, he's still extremely young. But let's say something horrible happens. It doesn't have to be something horrible. It could be something really good. But usually with people who are so incredibly, overweeningly self-centered, everything good that happens to them, they take in stride because they believe it's deserved. They're just impatient that it didn't happen earlier. But let's say, for instance, Jonathan Safran Foer woke up tomorrow morning and shuffled to the bathroom to pee and peed, and then realized that that his pee was dark, or that he couldn't stop, that he gave the mental commands to stop and get on with his day, and the pee just kept coming. So he has to go to the doctor, and it's an alarmed visit. The fallout from that, in addition to complicating his personal life, may complicate his art in a way that might be very interesting. I am going to hold open the door, not for a tragedy to happen to Jonathan Safran Foer, but for him to grow into a greater art than what he has. But his art right now I find admirable. It still impresses me. Let's see here. Number 7 is McCafe, an excellent source of world literature. And here I have a prop that I've shown it on this channel before. I've praised it many, many times. It's this thing. World Poetry, an anthology of verse from antiquity to our time, edited by Catherine Washburn and John Major, in a series with a general editor of Clifton Fadiman. This is a W.W. Norton. Who did this? I don't know who did this, but it's a nice big anthology. If you ever see it in a used bookstore and it's just one book among many, and you're wondering, is this one any better than any of the others? Give it a try. It is a very good anthology and very adventurous when it goes overseas, when it goes to other cultures. Let's see here. Number 8 is Peet's, P-E-E-T, a work that especially succeeds with its ability to craft words. When making up new words is what came to my mind, and that immediately made me think of a novel that I've recommended on this channel many times, The Wake by Paul Kingsnorth. Which is a weird story, partly historical, partly medieval, partly post-apocalyptic, and it's not only set in a weird kind of blurred world like that, much like, for instance, Ridley Walker, but it also has its own language, its own diction. It's told in that. It's not like some characters speak that way. The whole thing is told that way. So it's first cousin once removed from English. You have to work hard to figure it out. You have to learn a language as you're going along in The Wake, but it's well worth it. Oh my, it's well worth it to do. And it never quite leaves you either. You'll be finished with that book, and years later, terms or phrases from that made-up language will come to you when they're prompted by the outside world. Then the next one, number 9, is Café Bustelo, a work from a Spanish-speaking country that translates well into English. I don't have an answer for this one. Most of the original Spanish language literature that I've read in translation has not ever struck me as there being a problem with the translation. Sometimes, I've mentioned on this channel, sometimes you very much feel the translator in the room, and they're knocking over stuff, so you don't trust them at all. You'll be reading an English language translation of something, and you'll come across some horrible construction, or some paragraph that goes nowhere, or some weird word that just doesn't fit. It stops you completely when you're reading. And the correct first response to such a thing is always to suspect the translator before you suspect the author. Authors have been complaining for centuries about their translators, about how horrible they are, about a horrible job they do. Just recently, last year, I think it was, on Britta Bowler's channel, she mentioned going over the work of a translator of one of her own books and finding just the work was horrible, largely horrible. But when it comes to translations from Spanish language literature, I've very seldom had that feeling. I've read widely across the spectrum. I've very seldom had the feeling of, oh, I don't know if the author said that or said it that way. So I don't really have an answer to this one. We'll just move on. We've still got a bunch of questions to go until we get to a batch of things where I don't have answers. But this one was the only one right here. Then we have number 10 is Lavazza, a work that gives you a sense of Italy or Italian culture. One of the things that came to mind, first of all, was the poetry of Ugo Foscolo, who he's extremely well known as an Italian poet, but he's not, I don't think, well known to the general reading public in English. I'm not even sure. I know that Leopardi has a penguin in English that's bilingual, I think, with matching Italian on one side, the English on the other. I don't think Ugo Foscolo has one of those at all. He had a recent version from somebody or other about 10 or 15 years ago of some of his work. But I'm not really sure. Now that I think about it, his name was the one that I wrote down, but now that I think about it, I'm not at all sure of the extent of his publication in English. But the things that he can do with verse, oh my, they are so lovely. Just so lovely. So delicate that you almost think they can't be translated, but they can be. They can be. There's almost nothing that Italian can do that can't be translated into English. You just have to be almost as good a translator as the author was at being an author. But it can happen. It can happen. So I have hopes for a big popular edition of Foscolo. That would be great. Prompt number 11 is 8 o'clock. Your favorite use of time of day in a song. I'm assuming that 8 o'clock is not a franchise, but rather a type of signal. Among coffee drinkers, is it that 8 o'clock is the time when you start, or maybe 8 o'clock is the time when you finish? Maybe 8 is the latest you can have your last cup of coffee of the day without it threatening to ruin your sleep. I don't really know. I'm not sure the significance of 8 o'clock, but when it comes to time in a song, there are a million possibilities, and the first one that came to mind is by the great Dolly Parton, whose, I believe, birthday it is today. I think today, the day I'm doing this tag, is her birthday. But the song 9 to 5 is just wonderful. Like all of her songs are, it's just wonderful, so playful. So I'm going to pick that one. Prompt number 12 is Gevalia, Gevalia. Is that a coffee shop or a type of coffee? A writer whose works are always rich. The first one that came to mind is one that I'm gonna do a little bit of rereading in 2021, and that is Tom Wolfe, not Thomas Wolfe, but Tom Wolfe, the author who always wore a costume of a white suit, white pants, white spats, and all that sort of thing. Whose main novels, Bonfire of Vanities, Man in Full, are amazingly good. They are amazingly full of stuff, I think. I've maintained. Well, he wrote a minor work. I still think it's fairly full, called Hooking Up. It was lampooned by my brethren in the critical circles for how ostentatiously clueless it is on exactly the subject and in exactly the way that it shouldn't be clueless. So that you don't really care if an author is clueless off the clock, so to speak. But Tom Wolfe's big novels, I think, are tremendously good. And among those big novels, I would include The Right Stuff. I plan on reinvestigating him in 2021. But aside from maybe the minor efforts that were done late in his life, you very much get the impression when you're reading one of his big books that the author is throwing everything he has at the canvas, that he's leaving it all on the field, as the saying goes. And that's a great feeling. Especially in the modern era where modern practitioners of so-called literary fiction, you get the sense that they're hoarding their best anecdotes for Instagram or Twitter and not putting it in their fiction at all. So, so I'm going to say Tom Wolfe, and I will get back to you about my verdicts when I reread him. Then number 13 is Chase and Sanborn. Maybe that's a strand of coffee houses or a kind of coffee. The prompt is your favorite literary partnership. Mine is going to be an unabashed in-joke, and that is Mary McCarthy and Hannah Arendt. Let's just move right on. Then we move right on to a series of problems. So we're going to end this tag with a series of problems. Prompt number 14 is Martinson, and it's your favorite word or expression that originated in a work of literature. No idea. No idea at all there. Question number 15, or prompt number 15 is Native American Coffee, a work by a Native American you would like to read. Again, no idea. No idea at all. If there's a work by a Native American that I would like to read, why haven't I already read it? There's certainly none on my TBR. Maybe that was the gist of the question. And number 16 is Sanka, which again rings a faint bell with me. How would you go about reading more works from different genres? Honestly, don't understand the question. How I would go about doing that would be to do that. But I don't understand the question. I have a feeling that the question is getting at something else. But I don't know what it is. If I wanted to read more different genres, I would do that. I routinely try to do that. So, and then number 17, this is a batch of questions that I cannot answer. Number 17 is, what is your favorite brand of coffee? Never had coffee, not a sip of it in my entire life. So I don't have a favorite brand at all. I think even in my state of ignorance, I probably have a least favorite brand, and that's probably Dunkin' Donuts, just from the way it smells. But because a fresh cup of Dunkin' Donuts that has just been handed to the patron in front of me in line smells absolutely no different from the gray, greasy runoff water in a puddle directly outside Dunkin' Donuts. They smell exactly the same. So I have to think the coffee's bad. But one way or another, I've never had it, so I don't know. And the last one, number 18, is who do you tag? And this is, again, I think, I don't know who to tag specifically. This is foodie tags are an event. So I would ordinarily say if you drink coffee, you should do this. But I imagine if you do, you will anyway. I would just say if you've ever done a foodie tag before, if you don't want to do this one, if coffee doesn't float your boat, then go into the back catalog of Josh's other foodie tags. They're all great. And pick one and do that instead. But anyway, that is the coffee tag as the foodie book tags march on. 27. Good Lord. I wonder how many of these I've done. I could do a playlist all by myself just of those. But that is my Tag Tuesday. It is all about coffee, which I do not drink. I imagine right now, late morning is a time when a coffee drinker would probably want a cup of coffee to sort of launch them into the afternoon. I don't even know the precision of how it's done. You coffee drinkers out there, do you precisely time these things? You learn how you react to coffee and then you precisely calculate it? So you have a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. Do you know right down to the minute when that's going to start to wear off? And do you time when your next infusion of caffeine will be and how long that will take you? Do you do that? Do you parse out your day that way? I would love to know. But that's because I'm nosy. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.